Hi, BookTube. Welcome to a non-fiction review. Today's book tackles a question that many readers, many lovers of art ask. What do we do about great art produced by people who've done bad things? I struggle with this question. Back when the Neil Gaiman allegations were headlining, I grappled with the question. I came up with a number of different answers, but no overriding principle that could be used to deal with this issue of art that comes from people that you either find out simultaneously or later on have made serious mistakes. Today we're reviewing Monsters, What Do We Do with Great Art by Bad People by Claire Dederer, published in 2023. The number of pages, 273, but only 257 of those are text. The book is pretty reasonably priced considering its recent publication. The Kindle edition in the UK, under £6. In the US, under $8. So very good. I've seen secondhand copies online, but their price doesn't really give you a great saving over buying the copy new. Now, I purchased this new myself back in March when I went to Hay on Wye. I visited Richard Booth's. It's one of the largest and best known, possibly the oldest secondhand bookshop in Hay, and saw it there on a display table, one of those lovely display tables. Even in Hay on Wye, those are a thing. And it caught me. The title caught me immediately because those questions were on my mind. It hadn't been long since I'd done a video saying, what do we do about this? What do we do about this? So I was interested. If somebody had gone to the trouble to research and write a book, I wanted to know what answers they came to. Before the book begins, Claire Dederer has a page showing just two quotes. One is from Clarice Lispector, who's a Brazilian novelist, who says, "Who has not asked himself at some time or another, am I a monster? Or is this what it means to be a person?" And then another from Shirley Hazard, an Australian novelist and short story writer. "It is always tempting, of course, to impose one's view rather than to undergo the submission required by art, a submission akin to that of generosity or love." I think those two quotes sum up the themes that Claire is going to look at throughout her book, and I'll say more as we go through the chapters in more detail. First, let's talk about Claire herself. She was born in 1967 in Seattle, went to the University of Washington, and then her first publication came in 2010, so it was quite late. I think she had her family first and then began writing a little bit later. So she wrote Poser, My Life in 23 Yoga Poses. So not exactly a heavy work, but presently you can see she teaches the Master of Fine Arts in Writing at Pacific University. So she has a lot of writing and journalistic experience, and I've put a link to her personal website in my description box so you can get to know her a little bit better. I wouldn't want you to judge her just by the yoga book. She has done a lot of more serious work in journalism and history, and Monsters being one of her later works, I feel expresses her lifetime as someone who is enthused over writing as well as music. I think this is a very non-fiction reader friendly kind of book. No, that's a terrible way to say it. I think this book would be very friendly to people who've not tackled nonfiction before. That being said, the essays, although they're short, they do deal with a lot of conceptual stuff, and so I think a philosophy graduate would be very comfortable. Someone like me, I had to reread some parts, but they were worth rereading. I found the ideas presented in this book extremely helpful. But looking at the structure here, you can see that there's a little prologue of 11 pages where she talks about how she came to the idea to write this book. And then you've got 13 chapters. Each is about 19 pages long. That might sound long, but the font in this book is large. It is 12-point font. There's a half-line space between each line of text. And then there's numerous subsections within the text, and those get double spacing to separate them. So really, the number of pages doesn't give you a good idea of the actual amount of text. So think shorter, looks longer, but is shorter. And the writing style, I'd say it's a combination of essay and memoir. And it's the essay bits are a little bit more difficult, but then she will illustrate it with something from her own life. That'll be more anecdotal. And so she's tracking her own journey to finding answers, something that she can use. And then she breaks up those findings into these discrete discussion sections. And that's what we're going to look at next. There isn't a lot of resources in the book. It's not that kind of nonfiction book. There's some acknowledgements. There's about 13 pages of notes at the back. That also suffices for a bibliography. If she's used other sources, you can find them mentioned in there. One thing that I think is noteworthy to say about this book right away, about it overall, is that Claire Dederer was in her teens in the 1970s and in her 20s in the early 1980s. And so that's before the internet, before social media, all that. And in other words, also, it was before a time when a fan could have a lot of biographical information, validatable biographical information. I mean, there was some information out there, but it was sparse and you couldn't trust that it was true. And so for the most part, if you were in your formative, growing up, becoming a fan age during those years, you could love the art just for itself because that's pretty much all you had. So Claire, therefore, can write as a person who knows strongly the experience of loving the art first for itself because there was no other information available. Younger readers, those of you who've grown up with technology and social media, I don't know how much you'll be able personally to find her conclusions helpful. I think you will need to judge for yourself how much you can take away from the book. I still think there are things you can definitely take away from it. There's food for thought because this book is highly nuanced and covers a lot of different areas around this central idea. But I think it was good that Dederer wrote it. I think it was good that someone her age wrote it because it's a reminder that for most of human history, we haven't known. The artist has been invisible for the most part, and we've really just had the art, and that's what we've been judging up until very recently. The question of what to do about great art written by people who've done bad things, that really is a question for the internet age alone. But it's precisely because this book, you're going to need more information to judge whether or not it can do something for you and whether you want to purchase it. I am going to go through the chapters in more detail, even though that means this review will be a bit longer. The first chapter, the prologue, it talks about how Claire got started on this topic. In 2014, she was researching to write a book about Roman Polanski's films. She had loved those films, didn't know much about Polanski. And so unfortunately, in 2014, that was when she first learned in detail about his 1977 conviction for raping an underage girl. So the prologue is setting out the purpose of this book, or rather, what its purpose simply cannot be. Claire says she doesn't believe, because she wasn't able to do this for her, she doesn't believe that she can arrive at some kind of calculator where you plug in the greatness of the art on the one side and the horrible actions of the artist on the other, and then you go through some kind of computing process and out spits an answer at the end. Can you or can you not continue to enjoy this art? She says, no, that's not something that can be done. And she said that's because the issue isn't really with the artist, who is a single person. She says the issue is with the audience, and they are many and varied. Chapter 2 is about the Me Too movement. Claire makes this section more of a memoir because she talks about her own experiences of sexual harassment and sexual abuse, and she's describing how these experiences, once they are in your memory, they color your perceptions. And she suggests that the reason we can't have a single answer to the question, what do you do about great art made by people who've made mistakes, is if those mistakes happen to include sexual harassment or sexual abuse of women or children, then people are going to, our perception of the badness versus greatness issue is already decided by our emotions. The answer will always be an emotional one rather than a rational one. Chapter 3 is called The Stain, and this is where Claire Dederer wants to change the way we talk about human mistakes. She wants us to stop referring to people as monsters. She thinks that's dangerous because once you identify a person as a monster, you're almost saying, and I am not. And she said that is denial of our own shadow side. And she said it's always dangerous to deny that we have the capability to do the things that we see other people doing that we don't like. She says better to think of the mistake itself as more like a stain that will affect the person who comes to the artwork differently depending upon their emotional reaction to it. Some people will be able to go, okay, that's there, but I can still deal with the art. For other people, it's simply going to be sensorially overwhelming, emotionally overwhelming, and they won't be able to quite see past it to appreciate the art for itself. I'm going to talk about the next 3 chapters together because I think they're a brilliant critique of what we've done in the 20th century in terms of our relationship between audience and art. We have created 3 things that really didn't exist much, I'd say, before the 19th century, but really they came to their own in the 20th. The first is the existence of the fan. What is the fan? A fan is someone with a strange parasocial relationship with an artist or several artists. And it's a relationship that has been able to become more intense, more involved, and seem more intimate because of social media, because we can know the artist so much more, be so close, be in contact, tweet the artist, have them tweet back. We begin a relationship with them that we simply wouldn't have existed in the 19th century and not at all before. People wouldn't be able to imagine it existing. Just wouldn't. And she said, are fans part of the problem? Is the whole being of a fan a problem because you create a relationship which is not real, but it feels so intense? It's hard then, if that person lets you down, to remove yourself and go, okay, well, that's just a person who made a mistake. Fine. Lots of people do make very bad mistakes. It's not. We feel it more intimately, more personally, because we've invested something in our relationship with that artist. That something that people 200 years ago would never have done. The other category of person that now exists that didn't before is the critic. The literary, film critic, music critic, all these different kinds of critics are self-appointed authorities. And she says, are they part of the problem? Because has culture developed an art criticism that feels that it's almost above its own subjectivity, that it's got some fantasy about the authority that it actually has? What authority do critics actually have to tell us how to think, which art to regard as good, which to regard as bad? Where does this authority even come from? When did we ever start this construct? And finally, Claire Dederer looks at this concept of the artistic genius, which again is a 20th and 21st century phenomenon that has just grown. How is the artist part of the problem? Or maybe more society's way of treating the artist? Has society created this concept of genius, which includes a dangerous amount of freedom and which kind of expects some outlandish or egotistic behavior, expects that to be a byproduct of all the good art that comes out? And this is where the quote at the beginning from Clarice Lispector comes in, and it becomes relevant. Am I a monster, or is this what it means to be a person? When you combine all the media attention and hype, when you get the intense involvement of fans and all their parasocial relationships and their desire to get closer and closer to the artist, and then you get all the attention of critics and these cultural ideas that they bring forward. If you do that for over 200 years old, this system is. So a genius now is someone that we've almost made apart from the ordinary. We expect them to be better, different than other human beings, and not subject to the same rules as ordinary mortals, or the same pressures. We expect them never to crack, no matter what we do to them. Well, are we just setting ourselves up for big fails? Are we setting ourselves up to have Neil Gaiman's and Alice Munro's? And I'm not going to sum up all the rest of the chapters one by one, but toward the end of the book, what Claire does is turn the spotlight on herself as a writer and an artist and examine her own mistakes. And I really like that part of the book because she made herself that vulnerable. She admitted to her ambivalence about being a mother alongside her intense affection and bonding for her child. So, and she said how strange it was that she had this back and forth feeling, particularly because she was also very devoted to her art, devoted to writing, and she could see that there were writers who had abandoned their children, Doris Lessing, for example, in order to focus their attention more on their writing. And she said, well, you know, am I a bad mother for the time that I do give to my art? Because there are times when I do kind of push the kids away. Or am I a bad artist? Am I rubbish? Am I never going to be as great as I want to be because I let the children take my energy and my attention away? And the conflict that she talks through in there is, you can really identify it, and you can see how easy it is to start making these mistakes. And then, of course, she also goes on to admit, and I think this is very brave, admit to her own drinking problem and the way she finally faced up to it and solved it. But of course, the realization that while that was a problem, she was hurting people and she made mistakes. And a lot of the people who are around her now that she has recovered and has spent several years sober, they've forgiven her. They've forgiven her for a lot of the things that she did. And she's grateful for that. But she's also saying, well, you know, isn't that what we do sometimes? We have people that we love and they make mistakes. And yes, they sometimes hurt us, but our reaction is sometimes to forgive them and to carry on being with them. She said, not always, but, you know, it's there. It's a possibility. It's an option. And she throws this out to audience, to us, the audience, the fans, and says, could you do this for any of the people, any of the artists that you loved who have let you down and let other people down? Can you do this? Can you forgive them? Is it possible? Could you explore the possibility? How does Dederer conclude? She says, you know, if you find beauty in a work of art, that wasn't a choice, right? It happened to you. If you listened to a piece of music or you read a book, you saw a painting and it had an effect on you, you didn't choose that. You didn't sit down and go, now let me rationally decide whether I like this or not. You know what really happened. Something flooded you, emotion flooded you. That is a reaction to the beauty of the artwork itself. And Dederer is arguing, why can you not have that relationship with that piece of art? It's already happened. It's a feeling you've already had. Now the artist is standing there. They've done something wrong. You can have any feelings you wish about what that person has done, because it's understandable if they've done something that's objectionable or impacts you emotionally. But she said that doesn't change the fact that you had an emotional reaction to the art. And she says, in the end, she says, this has got to come down to your gut, to your heart. You have to sit down, you, the audience member, with the art you love and the artist who made it, who's made a mistake, and you've got to go, okay, in my gut, in my heart of hearts, do I still love the piece of art? And an answer, to her, that's how she solved it. She simply did a gut feeling for every piece of art she loved. So, for example, she found with the films of Polanski, she still loved most of them. However, with the films of Woody Allen, it was interesting that she was able to still appreciate some of them, but there was one, Manhattan, where there was too much of an echo of his relationship with his underage stepdaughter. And there was a kind of a tie-in there thematically between the film's material and the artist's action. And she said, no, for that piece of art, can't do it, have lost my love. The emotional effect of that piece of art now is different. How that art happens to me now is different. To sum up, I'm going to repeat what I said earlier. I think it may be harder for anyone who's grown up in the internet age to separate the art from the artist, to be able to say that they've got an emotional relationship with the art in isolation, okay? And that's fine, because Claire Dederer's book, I think, still makes room for you. It still says this has got to be an individual, emotional, subjective decision that you make for each piece of art, for each artist. It's up to you. It's down to you. It's your call. But I think it's a sad thing too, because any person can turn out to be imperfect. Any book that you currently like and you don't know anything bad about the artist, tomorrow you could find something out. That's what Alice Munro did for me. It was like, okay, but well-made art remains well-made. And that's why so much art survives beyond the death of the artist. And so maybe a better question to ask is this. If the idea of forgiving the artist is like, no, can't go there, sorry, that won't be happening. What about considering this? Think of a writer whose work you loved, absolutely loved. You had an emotional reaction to it, and then you found out something about the artist and you are not happy with that. Okay, imagine now, and this might be the case, imagine now that the artist has been dead for 10, 20 years. Now is that book still a good book? Is it? Because if it is still fundamentally a great book, then maybe it deserves to be divorced from the person who made it. Like maybe if it's that good, it deserves a life of its own. I don't know, throwing that out there for consideration. And that's the review done. I hope you find it helpful. I hope it helps you make a decision whether this is a book that you want to read and whether the ideas can be helpful for you in grappling with that question of what do you do when an artist that you love makes some serious mistakes. Thanks everybody for checking in. I'm going to be back in a few days' time. I don't know with what, because I'm doing a lot of batch recording, which means I can't do that. Hey, here's what's coming up next. Because I think, well, I don't know when you're going to see this, so can't really comment on the future. I'm not that good at the future, as we all are not. Anyway, speaking of the future, I hope the near future for you in terms of your reading goals goes really well. And I look forward to seeing you again in a few days' time. Take care. Bye-bye.